Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the I Measure You Research Review. Today I'm joined by Dr. Gillian Weir over in the United States of America. Jill, how are you doing? Thank you for joining us.
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Before we get started, Jill, I just want to say congratulations on winning the ISPS Emerging Researcher Award. You must be really proud of that achievement.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, very, very humbled.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, we'll dive straight in. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are, your background, and your journey to your current role?
So I did my undergrad in sports science at the University of Western Australia. It seems like a long time ago now. And I sort of was going through my degree, and I knew that I always wanted to work in sport. And we got to a lecture in third year where they were sort of designing what pathway you could take after sports science. And she said, okay, a lot of you here want to work in elite sport, as we all do. And she said, if you want to do that, then you have to do a PhD. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll do that then. And fortunately, I did a course in biomechanics in my third year of uni, and I absolutely fell in love with biomechanics. My professor, Dr. Jackie Alderson, was a really amazing teacher and has actually been an incredible mentor for me. So really enjoyed that, and so ended up doing a PhD in biomechanics. Was fortunate enough to work with the national women's field hockey team. They had unfortunately had a lot of ACL injuries, and I was interested in ACL injury prevention. So we did a training program with them over the course of 4 years, which was amazing to be able to implement that in a professional setting where you have all the support of their medical team, who were incredible and able to sort of implement it exactly the way that we wanted to. So that was awesome. I finished that in 2016, and then I did a postdoc in the United States with Professor Joe Hamill, who's been incredible to work with. So he had an industry-funded grant with Brooks Running. So a lot of the research I was doing was really highly integrated with Brooks, looking at footwear design and personalization to the runner. And then I just started a couple months ago with the New York Yankees. So there's been quite a few forks along the road in terms of working in academia versus industry. And I was always 50-50 whether I go down the academic versus the industry path. But the Yankees opportunity came up, and it was sort of really too good not to turn down. I think biomechanics in baseball right now is exploding, and you have all these amazing technologies and data interfaces that they have, which are coming up, and it's going to be really great.
No, fantastic. It'd be good to dive into the difference in culture between university, elite sport, and industry. I appreciate you haven't been with the Yankees for that long, but are you able to speak to the kind of the difference in culture and how much of a change it's been from moving from one to another?
Yeah, I think I've always been quite lucky, based on like the research that I do, to be quite integrated with sports teams anyway. And even if I was doing a project at a university that was sort of always related to sport, then I would sort of go and have a beer with one of the coaches and be like, is this actually like what you guys are after? And because obviously we all want to translate our research into the real world. So I think it's really important that you understand where you're trying to integrate. So I think we did a project at the beginning of the year, which was looking at like running on a bend in sprinting. And I've never done athletic stuff before. So, going and speaking to the people that you're trying to work with and talking to the sprint coaches at UMass about that project is super helpful. But I guess the biggest difference coming from like an academic setting to a sports team setting is that everyone at the Yankees has the exact same goal, which is to win. And people with a really diverse range of skill sets all trying to achieve the same thing. And you have that in academia. Obviously, the university wants to be successful, but you don't always have the access to, say, like the computer vision team at the Yankees are amazing, and we're all working on the same thing and getting to work with them every day on particular things. Whereas in a university setting, you're applying for grants, and everyone's has their own little niche interests and things like that. So that's probably been the biggest thing that I've noticed so far.
Okay, no, that's really cool. And I mean, just expanding on that a little bit further. Obviously, you've joined New York Yankees, one of the biggest sports franchises, not only in America but in the world. The majority of your research, I think it would be fair to say, has been in lower limbs. So what challenges do you anticipate, not only working in a club environment for one of the biggest franchises in the world, but also going from more of an emphasis to upper limb mechanics rather than lower limb mechanics?
Yeah, I guess, going from lower limb to upper limb is a lot harder than going from upper limb to lower limb. The shoulder is, and the elbow are just awful joints to try and like model biomechanically. And there are people that dedicate their entire research careers of how to find where the shoulder joint center is with, imaging and marker-based technology and things like that. So fortunately enough, like University of Western Australia, where I did my PhD, have a great history with cricket. So they've done dedicated a lot of time, a lot of PhDs towards upper limb modeling. So I have had some experience in that, and by no means am I the expert, but I try. So that's probably going to be the biggest thing. Is it's a lot harder to do that, especially in in baseball where you have such a high velocity movement. We're capturing at like 500 frames a second, whereas running you sort of only need sort of 200 frames a second. So there's a big difference there. And I guess like obviously coming from, I've worked in like Australian rules football, rugby, soccer, and some cricket stuff. And then coming into baseball, which is a new sport and a whole like new range of language. And baseball particularly, I think most meetings I sit in, I have like a wiki page up next to the meeting so I can Google like what on earth they're talking about. And they've been great. Like I'm like, I'm really sorry, I don't know what this word means. And if we're going to progress in the meeting, I need to understand. And they've been really good at understanding towards that. I think it's important. Like I think every sport that I've worked in, as a biomechanist, you don't always know exactly like how that sport runs, but you understand the mechanics of the human body. And that's like where we come in. But I think it's important to speak with the coaches and the analysts and understand like what language that they use for a certain term. Like, for example, I used to do some kicking consulting for a professional Australian rules football team. And so they'd have the players come in just after they've been drafted. We'd look at their kicking technique with like 3D biomechanics, and then I'd relay that information back to the coaches, and they would either, sort of change their kicking performance training or not. And then we'd follow them up a few years later. But I was giving them reports and saying things like lateral trunk flexion. And we sort of I was giving a presentation of all the reports one day, and one of the coaches was like, what is that? And then I sort of showed him visually what that was. And he was like, oh, so like falling off the ball. I was like, okay. So instead of writing lateral trunk flexion on the report from then on, I would write falling off the ball. So I think it's, especially when in biomechanics, we have some really technical terminology, and it's different the way you implement that in each setting, whether it's with a runner or a footy player or a pitcher. It's important to understand like what language that they use from sport to sport and even team to team as well. So and then I guess like buy-in is a big challenge. I think in any sports science setting, buy-in is huge, and you have like a really narrow time frame to have buy-in, because if you don't meet that, then sort of no one's really into it. I think with biomechanics as well, and marker-based stuff, putting like 100 markers on a picture is like a huge pain, rather than just putting on like a GPS. So, explaining to them like what the value of what they're getting out of it is really important. It has to be, super fast, and in terms of how quickly they get that information and how they can really easily implement it. I think it's different in like American sports, because you have compared to like Australia, you have these professional athletes that have like their agent, they have, a bunch of other people that you have to talk to before you can get them to do something. And baseball, I think, is slightly different to other sports, but I have friends who work in the NBA and the NFL, and when they first started, they went to put like a GPS on a player, and the player was like, what are you doing? Whereas in like Australia, you would just like, you wouldn't even talk to the player, you would just put it in the back of their shirt, and they would be fine. They'd come back and give it back to you at the end of training. So I think that's slightly different as well.
Now, I've got a couple of questions following that. So, I mean, language of coaching and the language that you use with your players is obviously of the highest importance. How important is player buy-in, particularly in your role as a biomechanist, where you're trying to make a difference? Basically, you're trying to improve performance, improve team outcomes. How important is that player buy-in? And as a member of the staff that's non-playing, coming into a new sport, how important is it for you to actually learn the sport? It's been a lot of discussion on social media recently around the importance, or how important it is for strength and conditioning coaches to have a real in-depth knowledge of the sport that they're coaching in. I mean, as a biomechanist, is that any different? Is it of paramount importance to you, do you feel?
Yeah, I think definitely you need to have a fundamental understanding of the sport, because you could be trying to intervene with something which makes absolutely no sense in terms of translations. So yeah, I think you definitely need to have some kind of understanding of what's happening and the mechanics of what's going on, because yeah, you could just come up with something that's completely unrelated, especially when we're talking about like research projects and things like that. And yeah, like, you know, we spend a lot of time, and I've spent a lot of time since getting here, like just watching like 10,000 frames a second videos of players hitting and pitching, and understanding like the different mechanics of a curveball versus a fastball, and you know, this pitcher versus this pitcher, and what makes them so different in terms of their exit, you know, their throwing velocity and spin rate and things like that. But I think it's also like, I don't think you necessarily need to like have been in, you know, baseball or basketball or whatever leading up. And I think that is beneficial in some ways, and non-beneficial in other ways. I think it's in any sort of organization, you know, in business, you have people that come from really diverse backgrounds because they bring something new, or they have a different way of thinking. And I think that's really important, is to have people that don't have the exact same way of thinking, and because that's really important for innovation.
No, fantastic. Great response. My next question is slightly off-piste. Similar to expertise within your sport as a coach being a hot topic, women in sport has also been a hot topic. So it'd be good to talk about your experiences, not only coming into, as I say, one of the biggest sports franchises in the world. How have you been received as a female, but also some of your prior experiences of working in elite sport as a female, and how you feel they've played out?
Yeah, I think to be completely honest, I think when I saw this question in your email, it made me feel extremely uncomfortable, and because talking about it publicly with a is uncomfortable. And I think I sort of was reflecting on the reason why I felt that way, and I think it's because no one's actually ever asked. So I really appreciate you asking. I think it's an important topic to talk about. I guess I'm at like a career stage where I haven't really hit like a ceiling yet. And so far I've been super fortunate to reap the benefits of working hard. And I've had some really incredible male allies, whether they be like performance coaches or academics, as well as some, great female mentors that I aspire to be. So I haven't like had an awful experience overall, but there are just like those like simple, like below the surface things that you have to deal with day to day. And I think I sort of have always worked in like, you know, male dominant environments. And I've always worked in men's sports, because that's, you know, that's a whole other, you know, bigger piece, is that you can only get paid in a men's sporting environment. And yeah, I guess like working in a men's environment it doesn't bother me at all. But there is like an element of changing the way that you interact with people. I think particularly when I was younger and coaching, I had to be really careful that if I ruled a player out because they of an injury, that I justified all the reasons why that they couldn't play, because if I didn't justify it, I would be interpreted as being like too soft or too caring, whereas someone in the same position as a male wouldn't have to necessarily justify that. And because I used to be a strength and conditioning coach during my PhD, And because the physio was also female as well. So it was always like, these are all the reasons why, you know, rather than just saying he's not playing this week. So yeah, and then things like making sure that you're being, you know, especially particularly when I was younger, you know, making sure that you're super approachable, but not like have that interpreted as being like flirtatious as well. Just like, and it's all like little things which, you know, fine, but it's just, they can be a little bit tiring after a while. I think probably the biggest thing that I've had to deal with is the proving yourself thing. There's definitely a period of time in roles that I've had previously that, you know, you know, that initial period when you walk in, people are like, what is she doing here? And you sort of, rather than just walking in and being like, this is how it is, and go do this, sort of, people are kind of, you know, wondering, you know, what you're about. So you have to really sort of spend a really fundamental part of time proving yourself, to show that you know what you're talking about, rather than a baseline, you know, automatically interpreted as perhaps that's not the case. And I think like overall that has like been good for me, because now I really can get buy-in quite quickly, because I've spent so much time like doing that over and over and over again. Yeah, so I think to be honest, like I think the Yankees is probably the first position where I haven't felt that way so far. I think, you know, I haven't been here that long, and everyone's been awesome and super excited about biomechanics and the stuff that we're going to do. And they've actually employed some really incredible females. Rachel Balkovic, who's a minor league hitting coach, and Christina Williamson, who's a performance science analyst as well. So I think, yeah, my experience at the Yankees has been by far, you know, amazing so far.
It's great to hear that your experience at the Yankees has been good, and I thank you for being so open and honest. I appreciate it. It was a bit of a curveball of a question. As kind of next step to that, given your journey, given your route to your current role, what advice would you give for a female looking to build a career in professional sport? And this doesn't necessarily have to relate to biomechanics, but just sport in general.
Yeah, I think just like getting after it and putting yourself forward for things is really important. Recognizing that there are barriers there, but some of them we put up ourselves. I interned at a football team for like 2 or 3 years, I think, and the head of strength and conditioning was like, "Oh, I think I'm gonna hire that guy who's been here for like 6 months." And I was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "I've been here for like 2 years. Why don't you hire me?" And he's like, "Oh, I didn't realize that you wanted to do that." And so it wasn't like his fault because he had no idea that I was interested, because I wasn't like putting myself forward. And in that 2-year time frame, they kept hiring people that were like the same career stage, or like guys that were like in my class at uni. So I think, yeah, that putting yourself forward for things is really important, and like and vouching for yourself, I think is how you get there, because, you know, working in sports science and getting internships are extremely competitive. So putting yourself forward for those things when you want them. Building a network is really important. So every job that I've ever got has been through my network. I've applied for positions and interviewed, but it's always been through someone that I knew through some consulting that I did, or through my advisors and things like that. So, you know, I've been fortunate that my network has been great through sports, through the university that I did my PhD at. But for those that don't have that network, go and do internships and find someone on Twitter and you know, just apply for things that you're interested in. Finding mentors, so not just a mentor, but finding many mentors. I've had a number of mentors that I look up to for different things, or I call in different situations. I'm like, is this good? Or should I be doing this? Or should I be doing more here? And what's your experience? So I think I have, you know, it ranges from, you know, females at my exact stage of career, females further on in my career. I've, you know, a couple of male performance science, Glenn Stewart and Jason Weber, I really look up to, and I speak to them quite regularly. And then also finding people completely out of sport, particularly when you're working in sport, there's you know, long nights, early mornings, weekends, and you kind of need like your mates that work outside of that field to sort of recalibrate you and say, okay, like you could work until, you know, 1 a.m. tonight, or we could like have a beer and you could just work tomorrow. So I think you really need that sometimes working in sport. And then one thing that I found big for me is that I have really bad imposter syndrome. Every job that I've like come into, I'm like, oh God, why on earth did they hire me? And I think it's actually quite important to have as a researcher because it makes you really challenge yourself and try and think outside the box. So I think, you know, if you have imposter syndrome, know that you're not the only one. We're all suffering, and I think just thrive on it and just, you know, use it to make yourself better, and don't put yourself down.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you. And just as a final question, obviously the Yankees is your day job, but are there any other side projects that you'll be working on? Any other research interests outside of baseball that you've got in the pipeline?
Yeah, so I think the Yankees will be taking up quite a bit of time. We have, you know, a lot of exciting things happening there, and I think in baseball in general, in terms of, you know, markerless motion capture technology and using all the data that they have already in terms of analytics, in terms of the ball and outcomes of the pitch and things like that. But now we can actually use biomechanics to integrate with that. So it's really exciting, and I'm super pumped to get into that. And yeah, and then other than that, I've been really fortunate to work with some, you know, continue some research with UMass and with Brooks and University of Western Australia. So my PhD was in ACL injury prevention, and I'm, you know, quite interested in the knee. So I have a few projects related to that, but yeah.
That's fantastic. Great to hear. And just in case anybody wants to reach out to you privately, Jill, off the back of this chat, how are they best doing so? Are you active on social media?
Yeah, I have Twitter. So I think it's I've got to look it up again. It's at Gillian_Weir_ maybe. And then my email if people want to reach out is GillianWeir58@gmail.com.
That's fantastic. That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you opening up on some difficult subjects. So thank you not only to Jill, but to all of those who have chosen to listen. As always, if you want to find a little bit more out about I Measure You, we have our Academy section on the website, so please do check that out. But thank you for your time, Jill, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks, Dan.